Hey guys, welcome to lesson 11.3. This is our last lesson before the quiz, okay? So this lesson is going to focus on simplifying rational expressions, and hopefully from our past lessons we remember that rational expressions are just a synonym for fractions, okay? So what we're going to be doing today is just simplifying fractions. The fractions are going to be a little bit more complicated than what we've seen in middle school. So it's not just going to be, simplify 8 over 10. We're now going to simplify fractions that involve the letter x or a variable. So our steps for simplifying. Step 1 is to factor both the numerator, which is the top of the fraction, and the denominator, which is the bottom of the fraction. This is why factoring is so important, guys. This is why we've been talking about it in chapter 10, in chapter 9. Remember your methods of factoring. The three most common ones that you'll see: GCF, working backwards, difference of squares. You may see a perfect square trinomial. You most likely will not see grouping, and you most likely will not see combining, okay? So the three really common methods of factoring that you will be using the most are GCF, working backwards, and difference of squares. And that's step 1. Factor everything. Factor the numerator, factor the denominator. Step 2 is to cross out common factors. Now, please notice, you cannot separate items that are being added or subtracted. So here's my example of common factors that I could cross out. I could cross out x plus 5 and x plus 5 because they are identical. In my non-example, I cannot cross out x and x. And people are going to do this, I guarantee you. And you will be wrong. Okay, guys? You cannot do that because the plus up here joins the x and the 5. They cannot be separated. If you want to put your own set of parentheses around them, please do that, okay? But this is a married term that cannot be separated, all right? So that means that there's nothing you could cross out here. The x in the numerator and the x in the denominator cannot cross out because the x on top is married to that 5, okay? Those are our steps for simplifying. Let's put a bunch of examples here for you so that you have a picture in your head as we move through some more complex examples in the PowerPoint. So here's my expression. Notice everything is already factored for you. So that's why these examples are just to warm you guys up, okay? So everything's factored. What's my common factor? What do they both share in the numerator and denominator? The only thing that they both share is x. So for the simplified form, remember we cross out that common factor. So if I were to cross out the x in the numerator and the x in the denominator, my final simplified form would be x plus 3 over 2. Okay? For my second example, let's see what the common factor is. Do they share anything? No. Okay, guys? Remember, up here in the numerator, the x plus 4 are married, so you cannot separate it. So there are no common factors. So the simplified form is just the original problem, x plus 4 over x. Okay? For my third example, we are going to have to write the denominator out the long way a little bit. Instead of 4x squared, I'm going to put 2 times 2 times x, okay? So I'm going to write that out the long way. Now look at what they share in common. On top and on bottom there's a 2. On top and on bottom there's an x. So the common factor would be 2x. To get to simplified form, I cross out the common factor. So on top I cross out 2x, on bottom I cross out 2x, and I am left with x plus 1 over 2x being my final answer. All right, guys? Now let's look at my fourth example here, 2x squared plus 3 over x. Remember, please, whenever we have that plus, these terms are married together. They cannot be separated. So there are no common factors. So that means my final answer would just be 2x squared plus 3 over x. There's nothing we can do. Okay, guys? So hopefully this slide gives you just a general idea of what we mean by common factors, by crossing them out, and by ending up with our simplified form. Okay? Now we're going to kick it up a notch with some examples, like this very first one. Okay? Simplify the expression 16x squared y over 32x to the fourth y cubed. So step one is to factor. There's not necessarily anything to factor outside of GCF, okay? All we can do is break these terms apart. So instead of 16, I'm going to put 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. Instead of x squared, I'm going to put x times x, and I'll just put my y there. Remember, everything has invisible multiplication. All of these terms are being multiplied in both the numerator and the denominator. Okay? For 32, I'm going to put 2 times, remember 32 could be 2 times 16, 16 could be 2 times 8, and then we keep breaking apart from there. So my final way of breaking down 32 is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. For x to the fourth, I'm going to put x times x times x times x. And for y cubed, I'll put those 3 y's. So I've used my GCF method of writing everything out the long way. Let's find out what the GCF would be. Let's circle what they share. They share a 2, they share another 2, they share another 2, they share another 2, they share an x, they share another x, they share a y. Phew, so they share a lot. So notice, the entire numerator is shared. So that means the GCF is 16 x squared y. So that's my common factor. So I'm going to cross that out in both the numerator and the denominator. So in the numerator, when I cross everything out, remember my placeholder for multiplication. I need something there to hold my place, so I'm going to put 1. Okay? So when everything crosses out on top, I put 1 as the placeholder. In the denominator, let me cross out my common factors, and let's see what I'm left with. 2, x times x, which is x squared, y times y, which is y squared. So my final answer down here, guys, simplifying the expression, would be 1 over 2x squared, y squared. Okay? So see, now it's going to get a little bit more difficult because you have to factor on your own. All right? Let's look at our next example. Factor both the numerator and the denominator. Again, our method of factoring here that we're going to use is GCF. So in my numerator, 5a would be 5 times a, 10 would be 5 times 2. So what do they both share? They both share a 5. So my numerator would be rewritten as 5 times a plus 2. My denominator is still just 5 times a. So what is my common factor? So the numerator and the denominator both share a 5. That's it. So I cross out the 5, and my final answer would be a plus 2 over a. And this would be my final answer. When they say simplify the expression, that's what you would tell me. A plus 2 over a. Okay? Here on my next example, simplify the expression. Again, step 1 is to factor. I'm going to use 2 methods of factoring here. In the numerator, I'm going to use GCF. In the denominator, I'm going to work backwards. So to GCF, I have 3 times x, and then I have 3 times 2. So what do they both share? The 3. So that means that I have 3 x minus 2 in the numerator. And for working backwards, I need two numbers that add up to 1 and that multiply to -6. So my two numbers are going to be +3 and -2. Okay, so I have now factored everything. Now you need to tell me what my common factor is. And what is my common factor? Look at what is identical in the top and the bottom. The common factor is x minus 2. So that means I can cross it out. And so my final simplified version would be 3 over x plus 3. That would be my final answer. Remember, guys, please, 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 you cannot cross those 3's out, okay? That is totally wrong if you do that. You cannot cross those 3's out because the plus keeps the 3 on the bottom married to that x, okay? This plus means that you cannot separate. So your final answer is just 3 over x plus 3. Okay, guys, so let's take a look at example 4, simplifying the expression. So again, step 1 is to factor. And in my numerator, the method of factoring that I'm going to use is difference of squares. They're both perfect squares. So I square root 4x squared and I get 2x. I square root 16 and I get 4. Remember, for difference of squares, I would put 2x plus 4 and 2x minus 4. That's my rule for difference of squares. One factor gets a plus, one gets a minus. In the denominator, there's really nothing to factor. But what does that little 2 mean? That 2 means that the factor shows up twice. So in the denominator, I really have 2x plus 4 over 2x plus 4. So what is my common factor? What do both the numerator and the denominator share? They both share 2x plus 4. There it is in the numerator. There it is in the denominator. So if that's my common factor, I can cross it out. And my final answer for the simplified version would be 2x minus 4 over 2x plus 4. So here is your final answer. And notice you cannot cross anything out because in the numerator it's a minus, the denominator it's a plus. Remember, to cross things out, they have to be identical, completely identical. Okay, guys? So there's my answer for example 4. All right, this is the last thing we're going to look at in this lesson. Okay, guys? Rewriting factors. Can you cross out these factors? This is kind of what we were just talking about. The answer is no, okay? Because they are not identical. When we say identical, we mean it. We mean x minus 3, x minus 3. Those are identical, but x minus 3 and 3 minus x are not identical, okay? However, look at bullet point number 2. If you rewrite the denominator, then we are going to be able to cross things out, okay? So every term is either positive or negative, all right? So we're going to talk about that here on the next slide and how we can rewrite this factor. So in order to rewrite factors that look like this, you put a negative sign outside the parentheses and you switch the terms that are inside the parentheses, putting the x in front. Remember, standard form is we always want the x first. So my numerator is already in standard form. I do not need to rewrite that. But my denominator, I do need to rewrite. So I put a negative sign outside my parentheses, and then I switch these terms, putting the x in front. X minus 3. So now I have rewritten that term. Instead of 3 minus x, I have negative x minus 3. And what do we notice now? Now we have identical common factors. So now we can cross them out. Let's cross out the x minus 3, cross out the x minus 3, but now I'm in trouble. I have nothing left. What are my placeholders? Remember, my placeholders here when I'm dealing with multiplication and division is an invisible 1 and invisible 1. So my final answer would be 1 over -1, which we could just simplify to -1. Okay, guys? So you will have to rewrite those factors and keep in mind those invisible ones. All right, I believe this is our last example. Simplify the expression. So step 1 is, of course, to factor. In the numerator, I'm going to work backwards. In the denominator, I'm going to do difference of squares. So I have my invisible 1. I need two numbers that add to 1 and that multiply to -20. So my two numbers for the numerator are going to be x plus 5, x minus 4. For the denominator difference of squares, I square root, square root. The square root of 16 is 4. The square root of x squared is x. So my two factors would be 4 plus x and 4 minus x. Now notice, my numerator is fine, but I have to rewrite both terms in my denominator because the x has to come first. So my numerator, let me write this in blue so we see the distinction. My numerator stays the same, x plus 5, x minus 4. Now my first term, the 4 plus x, I can just rewrite x plus 4 because that's my property of multiplication. Or I'm sorry, that's my property of addition, okay? If I have 1 plus 2, I get 3. I can just flip it and get 2 plus 1 equals 3, okay? So my addition, I can just flip, no problem. Here, my 4 minus x is where I have to implement the rewriting rule. I put negative outside parentheses, and then I can put x minus 4. Okay, so please make sure we follow that rewriting rule. Now we see the common factor that we have, so we can just cross that out. So my final answer would be x plus 5 over x plus 4. And notice I have an invisible -1. So I'm going to put the -1 out in front. Okay, guys? So here at the bottom, we have what would be my final answer for this simplified expression. And that is it for today's lesson. All right, guys, your homework 11.3 is in Google Classroom. Notice here's just a little bit of an outline for what we'll be doing for the rest of the week and into next week. On Thursday, April 23rd, you guys will have that whole day to just work on quiz review. There's not a new lesson. On Friday, April 24th, again, you have the whole day to work on quiz review, but that quiz review is due at night. So on the night of Friday, April 24th, make sure you get that quiz review turned in. Monday, April 27th, the answer key will be posted for the quiz review. So Monday is just reviewing on your own. Okay, guys? I'll most likely have an optional live session if you guys want to join in for a quiz review. Okay? But it's just reviewing, getting ready for the quiz. And our Chapter 11 quiz is Tuesday, April 28th. Okay, guys? Here is your homework that is in Google Classroom on what it will look like. Notice the first thing you have to do is rewrite it. So remember, we put our parentheses, we put the negative out in front. Make sure you write that properly. For 5 through 9, you just want to tell me the common factors. So just tell me what they share. So for example, in number 5, in the top, this would be 3 times A times A times B times B times B over 18 would be 3 times 2 times 3 times A times A times B. Okay? So if I were to tell, or if you guys really were to tell me what the common factors are there, they share a 3, they share an A, they share another A, and they share a B. So your answer for number 5, the common factors would be 3A squared B. So don't give me the simplified version for 5 through 9. Just tell me what the common factor is. Okay? For example, here in number 8, you would rewrite the numerator, x plus 3, x plus 3. The denominator, you would work backwards, x plus 3, x minus 1. So what is my common factor in number 8? My common factor is x plus 3. Does that make sense, guys? And I know I'm going over a couple problems here, but I want to make sure you really understand the directions. For the bottom half of the homework, this is simplifying. So this, you want to do the whole shebang, okay? Factor everything, cross everything out, and get to your final answer. So for example, if I were to do number 13, I would GCF the numerator. I would end up with 2x parentheses x minus 4. I would GCF the denominator. I would get 3 x minus 4. I would cross out my common factors. So my final answer for 13 would be 2x over 3. All right, guys? So that's what we mean when we say to simplify. Factor everything, cross everything out. Just give me the final answer. All right, guys. So there is our lesson for 11.3. Thanks for joining me for this one, and I will see you guys for our next lesson.